Ring-a-ling, y'all. It's Sabbath School time, and I am here to help teachers and front row students think creatively and critically so that you can get the most out of your class. Now, this quarter, as you know, we're studying Daniel, and today we're covering the lesson for February the 8th, From Arrogance to Destruction. So, hey, let's go. Okay, we're done with Nebuchadnezzar, and we've moved on to Belshazzar. And I just want to tell you a little bit about Belshazzar before we dive into the lesson. Now, the lesson and the Nabonidus Chronicle call Belshazzar Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, but guess what? We don't know how true that is. After all, Daniel 5:2 calls Belshazzar Nebuchadnezzar's son, and the fact is there's no word for grandson or great-grandson or nephew or whatever in the Hebrew Bible. And that's why Jesus is called a son of David. Jesus wasn't actually David's son, right? But we get it. Now, what makes it less likely that Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar are related is that Belshazzar's dad, a guy named Nabonidus, had seized power in a coup. Now, the king whom Nabonidus murdered was actually a grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. So it only makes sense that when you steal power, you need to legitimize it. And in this case, you do that by pretending you have royal blood. So when Daniel comes in the story and tells Belshazzar about Nebuchadnezzar, your father, he is navigating court politics. Or maybe Belshazzar is related somehow. I don't know, because the queen mother in the story seems to know who Daniel is. She seems like she's been around the court for a while, okay? So we don't know for sure. As for Nabonidus, he's a mystery. The records we have tell us that he put his son Belshazzar in power as co-regent during his third year, and then just basically left Babylon to go live in Edom for 10 years. And by the way, this is why Belshazzar offers to make Daniel the third highest ruler in the kingdom, because his dad is still technically number one, and Belshazzar is number two. So Belshazzar was probably still young-ish and immature, which may explain this party he's about to throw. So on the Sunday, it's interesting that Nebuchadnezzar conquers and kidnaps tons of people. He burns the temple and the city of Jerusalem down. But Belshazzar throws like one blasphemous party and he just gets nailed, right? Handwriting on the wall, you're done. Why? Because in verse 22, Daniel tells us that God expected Belshazzar to have learned humility from the example of Nebuchadnezzar. God doesn't need to teach each generation the same lesson, so that's why you have a Bible, right? Read, learn from the lives of other people. Back to Belshazzar. I want to make a distinction between pride and what I'm going to call foolish pride, for lack of a better word. Nebuchadnezzar had pride, okay? Pride in his military dominance, pride in his cultural accomplishment, the things that he's built, right? Nebi earned his pride. Not that pride is good, but he earned his pride. Belshazzar had pride he didn't earn, okay? Right now, as we speak in this chapter, the Persian army surrounds his city. He's lost most of his empire, and he's sitting around throwing a party. And at this party, he decides to offend the God of the Jews, the same God who flexed a muscle and turned old King Nebi into an animal. And both kinds of pride are wrong, don't get me wrong, okay? But foolish pride has the characteristics of being both wrong and stupid. Now, D'Souza, who wrote this lesson, points out a connection I had never noticed before between this feast and Revelation chapter 17. And what that means is that this scene, this chapter, has come to define Babylon in the book of Revelation. It's not the Babylon of Daniel 1, right? The Babylon that God is using to punish his unfaithful people. It's not the Babylon of Daniel 2 or 3 or 4, the Babylon that learns humility at long last. It's this blasphemous, pleasure-loving reverie, this snow globe empire that acts like it has power while its enemies wait outside the door. This is how Babylon is characterized in Revelation. Babylon is a bubble. It is blind. It creates this reality of power and control and influence and reassures the rulers of the earth that all is well when it is mere hours from falling, right? Belshazzar wants to give Daniel royal power if he can tell him the meaning of the writing. Of course, when the Persians come in a few hours, they're going to kill anyone with royal power. So it's not really much of a gift. Belshazzar doesn't understand how his gifts are actually a curse now. He has no real power. What does being the third highest in the kingdom even mean at this point? It means like nothing. In fact, it's a curse, right, to have that power. Now, the question at the bottom of Sunday about how we respond to ways in which our culture can profane the God we believe in is interesting. And please, 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 Don't just use this as another opportunity to blast pop music and movies and talk about living in the country. Okay, this question is important and it deserves more thought than just this kind of effortless, reflexive answer. Okay, so don't go see a movie, don't listen to that music, whatever. But I suspect there are more subtle, deeper, more awkward instances of profaning our God in our culture that we don't deal with as easily as, I don't know, not listening to music or watching movies. Okay, what do you do when you're at work and your boss uses God's name in vain? Or what do you do when you see the whole world around you working on Sabbath? Do you like run outside and say, "Stop, heathens"? Okay, right. We got to think a little bit more deeply about this question. You'll notice that Daniel doesn't barricade himself in the treasury, saying he'd rather die than have these goblets be profaned. He doesn't storm into the party and condemn them for profaning the instruments of God. But when Daniel is called, he comes. And when he is asked to speak, he does. And if this was Israel, you know some prophet would have shown up to tell the king off for this. But this isn't Israel, it's Babylon. And we, by extension, don't live in Israel today. There are no countries with whom God has made a special covenant. So we are in Babylon, right? Let's move on to Monday. A hand appears out of nowhere, begins writing on the walls. Now, either Belshazzar has toddlers running around the palace, or this is a divine act. Without exception, the author of Daniel is always respectful of these Babylonian and Persian kings, with the exception of Belshazzar. Belshazzar is described as going pale. He crumbles to the floor, his knees knocked together. I think it's like the King James, where it's like his knees smote one another, or, like they're just banging. He's so, it's comical, right? It's kind of maybe, I would guess, an exaggeration, right? I've never seen somebody so scared their knees start banging together, but I guess that's possible, right? But that's like the height of fear. Belshazzar yells out in panic for the Chaldeans, and this is not a flattering picture of the king, okay? Even when Nebuchadnezzar is a jerk, even when he's a monster, the author of Daniel shows Nebuchadnezzar as strong, and there's no similar respect for Belshazzar here. Okay, so there's handwriting on the wall, and once again, the king calls in the Chaldeans to figure it all out. Honestly, these guys get paid way too much. Belshazzar offers the greatest rewards he has to offer, and yet none of the Chaldeans are worthy of them. Isn't that kind of like sin in the microcosm, right? Sin sounds good in theory. It promises absolute freedom and power to do whatever you want. But you never quite get the prize. Or if you do, you find out it's kind of worthless anyway, because as we've seen in this story, what power do you really have when your city is surrounded by the enemy? Sometimes we think wisdom is something we learn, but the perspective in this story is that wisdom is a gift. We do not learn wisdom, we seek it. And God gifted Solomon his wisdom, right? And Daniel too. Learning the meaning of the writing on the wall is about more than going to school or learning languages. We've talked about how the Chaldeans had these dream books, and you could just say, well, if you dreamt about McDonald's, that means this. Okay, those books are not going to help you here. Those books are not the source of wisdom. That kind of knowledge, that kind of book knowledge, only takes you so far in life. Jesus told his disciples several times that he was going to die, but they couldn't understand it. They didn't have wisdom. James calls it the wisdom from above. And you can only get that when you're in tune with God. And finally, can we just give a hand for God, the party crasher? That's pretty awesome. All right, let's move on to Tuesday. The lesson is crawling through Daniel 5. Like, we're just going through a few verses at a time. So anyways, everyone is flummoxed by the writing on the wall. What do? The Queen Mother enters. This is the only convincing evidence to me that Belshazzar was related to Nebuchadnezzar in some way, right? Because she's probably not the queen, Belshazzar's wife, because she seems to remember things, Belshazzar doesn't, although that is every wife. But anyways, stay with me here. It seems she wasn't at the feast either, because verse 10 suggests she only entered because she heard all this commotion at the party, right? Probably, Belshazzar screaming. Anyways, this queen, who like many women in the Bible doesn't have a name, is nevertheless a part of a long line of women in the Bible who exemplify wisdom when the men around them do not, like Abigail, the wife of Nabal, or the wife of Manoah, who never gets a name, right? Or Deborah, or Jael. This queen appears to be the only Babylonian in the entire book who ever gets the point about the sovereignty of God. She calms everyone down, telling the king not to look so pale, and tells everyone that Daniel is your man. So now we move on to Wednesday. Daniel's called in. And by now, honestly, wouldn't Daniel be like the first guy you called? Like, he's done so well in this book. And I feel like if I stubbed my toe, I'd call Daniel. He's got to be the first guy on your phone. But the question is, why could Daniel read the writing and no one else could? Or maybe they could read it, they just didn't know what it meant. Now, the words that we have in the Bible are in Aramaic, which was a very common language at this point in human history. And they are 4 independent words, and Daniel ends up stringing it together into a coherent sentence, but not before chastising the foolishness of the king. So the words, I'm going to butcher this, whatever, you get it. Mene, mene, tekel, Perez. The words on the wall are weird, and we still don't understand everything about them. Why is mene repeated twice? Why is the last word Perez in the plural? Now, it reads something like, literally numbered, weighed, divided, plural. Now, God, who inspired people to write over 800,000 words in the Bible, can apparently only spare 4 words for our story here. And it all doesn't matter because Daniel gets what God is getting at. So my assumption is that they could read the words, they knew what they meant, they just understand what these 4 words put together, what that meant, right? Numbered. What does that even mean? But Daniel figures out what God is getting at here. Okay, Babylon's days have been numbered because it has been weighed and found wanting. So the kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. The guys who are camped outside your walls. On to Thursday. So Babylon ends where it began in the book of Daniel, used by God. Just as Jerusalem had been weighed and found wanting, so God punishes them with Babylon. Now Babylon has been weighed and found wanting, so God punishes them with Persia. Now, we're told that very night the king fell, he died. We don't know exactly how that happened because our historical sources kind of contradict themselves. Some sources suggest Belshazzar went out to meet them in battle, and others suggest there was no battle at all, and somehow the Persians got into the city, perhaps by rerouting the Euphrates River, right, and entering through the riverbed. We don't know exactly how it was done, but we know that it was done. And we began Daniel with the ruins of Jerusalem, and now we have the ruins of Babylon. And hopefully these Persian kings are nicer, right? And nothing bad will happen to Daniel. I'm sure he's going to be perfectly fine. Anyways, that's where we're going to stop this week. Study up and have a great class.